Hey. Hey. So today, really happy to be here and going to talk about Canadian long-term athlete development and really how basketball has implemented LTAD. So that's what I want to share with you today. Kul att vara här. In one day. So my long-term development in Swedish, we'll see how we get in a few days. But I really want to acknowledge the Swedish Basketball Federation for their involvement in LTAD, their commitment to change, being open-minded to hearing about the world, and really acknowledging them for bringing it to their population, to you. And I want to start by acknowledging you for being here. Really aware that you had to give something up, whether it's family or work or just your leisure time in order to be present this weekend. And it certainly speaks to your commitment to our global game, the game I love. And really want to acknowledge you and let you know that fully aware that there are things that you had to give up in order to be here today. To listen to it. So I want to start with a quote about change, because change is really at the basis of this. And so when we talk about change, the only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, to move with it, and join the dance. So for me in the next hour, I'd like to invite you to join me in my dance. And let's see where it could possibly take us and take the athletes here in Sweden. So just my contact information, if there's any questions coming out of this. I do get a lot of emails. I do try to answer them. I don't mind repeat emails if I haven't answered you. I don't find it insulting at all. So go ahead, email me a few times, and for sure I want to make sure I get to it. But I want to talk about my commitment, and for sure my commitment is to the development of basketball, but also committed to the experience of the athlete. And when you hear about either programs or implementations or where I'm coming from or my perspective, really keep in mind my commitment is to the athlete. So I might be talking about officials, I might be talking about administration, I might be talking about coaching, but truly the commitment is the athlete. And for sure my commitment is to the athlete nationally, but without a doubt globally. And so, reasons why it's important to me to share this with you is because your athletes matter to me as well. It is the global game, the global growth of basketball that strengthens each of us in our own nations. So that's for sure my perspective on this. So I want to share with you a little bit. This was done in 2014, so it is a few years old, and it wasn't done by our federation. It was done by a survey company that had done it for multiple sports. So, the statistics were supposed to be comparable. But I want to share with you some of the things that they found about basketball in Canada. So the first thing is they found that there's 354,000 kids in Canada playing. And so when I look back at my commitments, that's 354,000 people that I'm committed to make sure that their experience is one that is safe, that is healthy, that it has opportunity, that can give them life skills as well as sports skills. And so that's a big responsibility. Now, I just want to note, it says from athletes from 3 to 17 is what they surveys. We do not have programs for 3-year-olds. So in that category, it would have been a big fat 0. But there are other sports that do, and so again, it's a comparative statistic, so that's where that comes up. I just don't want anyone walking away saying Canada's got programs for 3-year-olds, not a thing, okay? So average age is 8.6, okay, in terms of start. So if we take a look, whether as a federation we're involved or not, whether it's in the school system or not, and again, a lot of, for us, it's the introduction is in the school system. So making sure that we are involved, and that is an area to connect with. You can see that how it's dispersed throughout the country. We do have basketball in the north. I've seen it myself. I've definitely been there. But the numbers are a little bit smaller. But that does exist. We've got 3 federations through the north as well. We've got 10 through the central area. So we've got a division between male and female, so you can see that there. And in terms of where it ranks, basketball is ranked within that population number 3 in the country, so we fall behind our favorite soccer and hockey. A little bit of similarity here in cultures between our countries. But the interesting thing that came out was in Toronto and Vancouver, it was actually, so in 2 of our major cities, it's actually the number 2 sport. Amongst girls, it's actually the number 2 sport. And among new Canadians, which again we saw Camilla's program yesterday, which is also a venture that we're getting to. It is also the 2nd favorite sport to Canadians coming in to our country to help grow our country. And so those are very interesting statistics for us as to who is it that we're committed to and who is it that's playing. So some of the things I just want to share. You know, some of the thoughts of the parents, but also on average how many hours they're spending at basketball. And so here at 5.7 hours a week is on average. And again, it doesn't mean we don't have the statistics looking at it like is it organized play or you know, is it play that they're doing on their own. So we don't have that breakdown statistics. But I mean, they are spending time within the sport. So it kind of gives us a bit of a breakdown, and I certainly want to give a shout out to our Wheelchair Basketball Federation. They have a federation of their own, get more funding than we do because they keep bringing home medals for the Paralympics, which we have yet to do. So we do work together because it is, at the end of the day, the same game, and you know, sharing their successes, and extremely proud of our wheelchair basketball, both our men's and women's, who represent us around the world and with their sport. So LTAD, when we talk about it, there's 3 sort of outcomes that are present in LTAD, and it certainly starts with physical literacy, which I know some of you have been able to connect a little bit about physical literacy, but as someone who's involved at the NSO, and again my responsibility of being player development from grassroots to high performance, it's very clear that physical literacy is the basis of this, and it feeds into 2 different systems. One, excellence, which is really where, as an NSO, when we're dealing with our high performance teams, but there's no point in just focusing on excellence if you're not working on the groundwork. I mean, that's pretty you know, basic knowledge. You need the bottom in order to hold the top. And so physical literacy needs to be an area that we pay attention to. And then clearly, physical literacy also feeds into active for life. And so that's the commitment that someone, when they are introduced to basketball at 8.7 years of age, that they stay with it for another 50 years. If we are able to truly activate our active for the entire life. And then excellence clearly feeds into active to life. So looking at that sort of transition and how important that is. So in 1998 is when the government actually introduced LTAD to the sports system. Implementation didn't start to 2003. So it's been a little while, and you know, I've asked you to dance here with me today, but we've been dancing for a long time in Canada. And you know, sometimes it looks like a nice line dance, and sometimes it looks a little bit crazier. So it's certainly not a straight line change, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's really nothing wrong with that. That's a part of it. And so you know, that's been our transition starting in 2003. And I've been, yesterday I had the opportunity to speak with a lot of very intelligent people, and one thing that really came clear is how the why and the what and the how have to make sure that they're speaking to each other, because we often go ahead and create the what are we doing and how we're going to do it and forget why we're doing it. We go and make competition structures, we're going to figure out how we're doing it and what we're doing, but why is it that we're doing it? And so as administrators and leaders in your communities, it's really important that you keep checking back on the why and that it lines up with our what and how, because it often gets lost. And so I'm going to spend today talking about what we did and how we did it, but I don't want to go there before I start with the why. So I want to share this little video with you. It's certainly not basketball, it's outside in a green field, but I think it really captures why LTAD. We're good? So just the first time through, just watch it. Just enjoy it. So, why? And a couple things to think about with that video, other than, you know, it's pretty unbelievable to see a young athlete being able to like maneuver the way through the sport. But I want us to take a look at this again, and I want you to, now that we've seen the video, I want you to pay attention to a couple things and run a few questions to find answers in there. So one thing I want you to look at is the young gentleman in red, his teammates. I want you to take a look. I mean, it's really hard not to watch him, but take a look at his teammates and just kind of look at what they're able to do within this rugby match. What kind of skills are they learning and trying within this competition? And then also take a second to take a look at the other team. So focus a little bit on his teammates, and then focus a little bit on the other team and what kind of skill sets that they're implementing at that space. And then as you kind of start taking both of those things in, I want you to think about, or sorry, you know, kind of tune out of the actual picture itself, but start to listen. And listen to the sounds of the supporting crew. I'm going to assume as parents, although we don't actually see them. It could be, I don't know, fans. I'm going to watch a youth game. But I'm going to go with maybe a family, families along the sideline. And I want you just to listen to some of the what you hear as we rewatch this. So we'll just rewatch it here and look at those three aspects, if you could, please. Oops. So we're kind of getting it here. So what are some of, or what are some of the things that you picked up about the teammates? Just kind of shout it out. I think I can hear from here. Did you see, like, what was seen? What did you pick up from the young gentleman's teammates? What were some of the things? Passive, standing. Yeah. This is clearly a really important move in rugby. Not at all. No. Yeah, so you saw a lot of passive, uninterested, not super fun. I mean, maybe if they're training for a track meet, like not this sport, like this, they could get some training, but I mean, it's certainly not on grass, right? So looking at that. What about things that you observed the other team? What were some of the skills that they either were missing or learning, or just observations of what you picked up from the opposing team? Fear, yeah. Thinking twice about the tackle or the stop, for sure. Anyone see like a kid like just having super fun on the opposing team? Like, this is wicked, I can't wait to do this again. Okay, not so much, right? What about the crowd? What did we hear? What, you know, if you're able to shut out the visual, what were you able to hear from the crowd? Anyone hear anything? Cheering, yeah. Cheering on the single player playing the game. Approving the behavior, supporting the behavior, for sure. And I mean, at the same time, it's a sure thing that they weren't like, you know, stop him, get him. But, you know, that's certainly what we're seeing. We're seeing a one-man show and support for the one-man show, etc., right? So this is why we need to look at LTAD. And if I go LTAD, if I go back to my commitment, and if my commitment is to improve the experience of the athletes, and if I take a look at those athletes, the experience is not the one that I want to give them. So as a leader in sport, as a leader in basketball, that's something I take to look at. Has anyone seen something similar within basketball around that age? To me, it looks like, you know, same age, and it looks like with two teams with an early developing point guard, the point guard that has the handle, and it looks like a high ball screen, high pick and roll for that player with the other player that just comes up and sets a screen. That's their only job on the team. The tall one for their age. And the athlete comes off the screen over and over, and we've got the other kids just waiting there, instructed to rebound. But once they get the rebound, get it back to the early developer again. And that's what this looks like in basketball. And I mentioned I had an opportunity to go up to the north a few times now in our country, which is really cool and very beautiful, and also very cold. And in Yukon, they run this massive tournament, and it's for grade 5s and 6. So that's like, if I got it right, about 9, 10, 8, 9, 10, 11 could be in there. And they all fly in from all the regions to the north on these like mini planes that really can only fit their own teams. It's like the first time they've ever flown, the first time they've gone to a hotel, first time they've seen a water slide. It's really exciting for them. And I said, you know, I want to go see what's happening up north. And they'll have like 60 teams participating in this tournament. It's unbelievable for our north. So I went up and worked with some of the coaches and evaluated some of the coaches, and the team that was like blowing out of teams was playing basketball just like this. We had an early developer coming off a pick and roll with, you know, an athlete that was developmentally more mature than everyone else, setting this ball screen so no one gets to get through it. And he would just come off and not make a read. He was just faster and stronger in his early development to come off this ball screen than anyone else, and would just attack the rim. And 2 or 3 other might come and guard him, and they wouldn't necessarily look for the open player, but he would still look for the shot, because again, being faster and stronger as an early developer, he was able to do something like this. And so, you know, it's a bunch of the little boys team, and they're excited, and they're cheering, and they're moving on, and you know, a lot of the players weren't getting into the game because you had to make sure that the point guard was on the floor, and you had to make sure the tall player was on the floor so that, you know, they had the only action that they ran. And so I came to one of the matches a bit early, and there's a little stage, and the boys were sitting there, and they were playing around, so I went and sat with them and just asked them questions like, you know, what have you learned this year? You know, what's your enjoyment? And I sat beside, you know, the kids that were playing, the kids that weren't, and I asked one of the kids, played a little bit, but not a ton, and I said, you know, like, how are you liking basketball? How did you choose basketball? And he said, it's okay. And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, okay, like, what do you like better? Is there another sport you like better? And he says, hockey. And I'm like, ugh. Just like my entire cavity. I'm like, what? Why? But instead of going into all the reasons why I think you shouldn't like hockey, I asked him, why is it that you like hockey? And he said to me, well, it's more fun. And I said, what do you mean? How's that? Like, quit, man, it's freezing. Like, how could you pop? What do you mean it's more fun? And he said, well, I get to play. I touch the puck. And it really clicked for me. I'm speaking to a 12-year-old in the north that has this amazing tournament. They're bringing all these kids together, and he is sitting there, and we as a sport leaders, are allowing and pushing our kids out of our sport because of the way it's structured and played. And as coaches, not even realizing that the sport we love, that we're driving people away from it. And so it really, really got clear for me. Enough of that, eh? Okay, so we've got a generic LTAD model, and this is what this looks like, and these are the ages. Now, we're using biological age, so the age to which your year of birth, excuse me. And so that's what's represented there for males and females, really noting that there's a bit of difference in terms of timing of puberty and differences within the body, so they fit into different spaces. But there are ranges within, and those ranges allow for the developmental ages. And I'm going to talk more about those two things in a little bit. But we have active start, we have fundamentals, we have learn to train, which is all first contacts. Like this is the first time they're touching different sports during these stages. And then after this, it kind of branches into multiple spaces. So up the left-hand side, we've got more organized sports. So we've got what we call train to train, we've got train to compete, we've got train to win. And then we've also got this competitive for life. So it might not be, you know, I mean, we call the left-hand side like competitive stream, but more like an organized competition working towards elite. Competitive for life is kind of a recreational competitive. And then we've got active for life, which is really self-driven, and those motivations are very much internal motivations that are going on. And it's really great that our country did this and created this LTAD for us to work with. But what we actually did is sportify it, and this is what really makes it strong, and this is where we've really seen impact. And so we took that LTAD, and we've got our star, Steve, up here representing, and we actually added a stage, and we added learn to win. And it was very important for us to really look at our demographic to see how this actually works for us in our sport if we truly want to be committed to implementation and to impact in that. So you can see the ages differ a little bit going through there, and train to win is 23 to 25 and above. But we certainly only enter that stage if we have obtained an Olympic medal. It is the top of the top, and as of right now, we have 0 athletes in that space for basketball. We're working on it, but we actually right now cap off at learning to win. We are learning how to win at that stage. Now, the thing is I've been talking about reading it from the bottom to the top, but what is extremely important if you actually read it from left to right. And what that looks like, and this one's a bit clearer, so I'm just going to jump back. But if I start getting towards, let's say, that train to train that's close to competitive for life, so I'm working this way here, that's kind of, you know, a lower level of elite. And what goes on there and what that looks like is very different to as it moves to the edge towards excellence. The very edge is going to be the top team to which you can play on, and at train to train, that's under 16. Okay, where we've got, you know, 14 and 15-year-olds on that team. And so that's going to be that elite sliver to which we have to look at the programming. But that programming is not the same and does not fit all the way horizontally on. It actually changes as to what that looks like. Same with train to compete, the sliver there. And with train to compete, we would look at kind of our university programs. We would look at our under 18 programs. Some of our under 19 programs would fit in there as well. And then we're moving back towards like our club programs, our provincial team programs in that age. And so the programming absolutely differs horizontally as well as it does when you go through the ages. So we really sat down and tried to define and figure out who it was that we're talking about and how is the sport delivered in each one of these stages. So, you know, if we just take a look at Learn to Train, we're talking about, you know, parents are influential in this space. We talked about the PTSOs, so for us that's our provincial and territorial sporting organizations. So, you know, it'll be Basketball Ontario, Basketball Manitoba. Our clubs are going to be involved in that, the schools for sure, and then community sites. So for us to make sure that basketball, and again, the commitment is to the athlete, that their experience in all those spaces for the Learn to Train, that's who we have to explain the why to make sure the what and how aligns. So out of this, we're able to now really create implementation and figure out how to get this done. So there's a bunch of ways we were able to do this. And three main ones that we decided this was really important. So the first one was going to be system alignment. Again, this is all occurring in 2003, so I can like talk from a place of wisdom now. But we thought this was going to be the place that we need to start, was the system alignment. So aligning our basketball community. And what that meant for us, unbelievably now looking at it, was that we actually played with 3 different rule sets in our country. So we played with Federation rules, which is the high school American rules. We played with NCAA rules, and we also played with FIBA rules. So depending on the league to which you played in, and some of the athletes that entered these leagues, you could play like 2 different rule sets in a day. You could play 3, depending on what your schedule might look like. And so our first obstacle and change that we were led to do is look on that last slide, all of those organizations, and we said, how can we get them into one space with the rule set? And so at the slide at the very beginning, we had a slogan on the back talking about one nation, one sport, Canada basketball, right? And that has been a long change journey. And I have to say, starting September 1st of this year, we just did it. From 2003, yeah, it's fantastic. It's a huge accomplishment. So our last organization was our Ontario, which is our biggest province, high school federation, just turned to FIBA for the first time this September. So, you know, change is certainly not a short journey, it's a long journey. And like I said, the dance is quick sometimes, and sometimes it feels like a 2-step. It's pretty slow. So system alignment, and then the integration is the next step here. So developing and integrating actual pathways. So what is it and how do we do it? So really making sure that we're taking care of the health of the nation. So the health of the Active for Life, developing the game itself, and then also the compete for the nation. And I'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow, about how in 2003 we really had no business to set and talk about competing and who we are was a competing country. And I'll explain a little bit about that and our pathway to winning. But that was definitely something we looked at. And then competition schedules, which we're still dancing with. And the third thing was our competition schedule. And what happened with our competition schedule in our country, which I'm sure it does in most places, is the how and the what got created. So how we're going to compete, when we're going to compete, you know, all this sort of thing, but we never really took into consideration the why, and now our why changed a little bit. So it's time to go back to look at how we do it. And so we want to make sure that there's age-appropriate training for competition, and also the ratios are matching up now with all of those spaces. So there's 10 factors that come into LTAD, and these are the 10 of them. So we've got physical literacy for sure, foremost. It's the basis, and that's extremely important. So we start there, for the right programs, and we created our athlete development model. And so our athlete development model is the how based on the why of the LTAD and the 10 factors. So this is the document to which we live and breathe. So when we go to create a program, when we go to talk about competition, our reference is our athlete development model when we go to do such things. So today, you know, these things take they're deep topics, they're really great topics, but today I've been asked to talk about 5 of them. So these are the 5 that I'm going to try and dive a little bit deeper into, and if we don't get it in this room, I'm certainly happy to talk about it. And some of you have been able already to share with, which is awesome. So, you know, try to connect with others to try and pull things out. But if I don't get to the depth that you need or you want, I'm more than happy to continue to dive. So the first is that physical literacy. So when you start to take a look at, so the way the diagram works, because I know it's a bit small, so the dark blue are sports that are stronger in developing those skills at the top. Okay, so like, for example, if team sports are at the bottom, which for this context, let's just take a look there. And you can see there's a lot of navy blue going on. So team sports is a really great space for developing fundamental movement skills. The gold that's up there is that those sports are moderate developers. They kind of develop it, they touch on it a little bit. And then the white squares are actually where those sports do not develop that fundamental movement skill. And so when you take a look at our sport, it's one of the really great sports, and as much as we want them to keep into our sport, it's actually a great basis for them to move into other sports. So it's actually a good fundamental sport for crossover, because we teach a lot of the fundamental movement skills if we're doing planned practice or purposeful practice. Okay? Now there's two areas that they say team sports generally don't develop. One is swimming. So, okay, fair. And the second is rhythm. However, Camilla, I don't know if you're here, but Camilla told me the other day that she had her team doing a dance through the skills. So this is something that I'm waiting for that video to see, as she might just prove the theory wrong, or maybe basketball is just the exception that we found a way around this. So what I want you to do is take a look at these skills. So these are some of the FMS, fundamental movement skills, that we're talking about. And what I'd like you to do is to choose one of the 3 horizontal rows. So you're either taking like row 1 that starts with agility and ends with climbing, or you're taking row 2, which is walking, and it ends in balance, or you're taking row 3, which is throwing, and it ends in catching. And what I'd like you to do is think about either your personal team or the teams within your club, and I want you to go through each one of those and think, for example, throwing. Do I see throwing in practice? Do I see it in competition? And then I'm going to move to the next one. Do I see? And go through. So just take a moment, pick a row, and kind of go through that row and test your competition and practice environment. Okay, so once you're done your row, what I want you to do is turn to a person next to you, and again, we can do a cross table if it doesn't work out in terms of, so it might be groups of 2, groups of 3, and I want you to, between the 2 of you, you might have the same row, you might not, and that's not a problem, see if there are any of those skills in your row that did not turn up in your practice or game environment. Okay, so just take a moment, just the ones that didn't transfer. Just a great question. Why are there 2 balances? One's balancing on an object and one's just balance. So it's just 2, yeah, I didn't put the writing in there. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of bring it forward a little bit. Did anyone come up with any of these movements that they don't see in practice or a game? Again, you can just shout it out without anyone being like wrong or right or any of that judgment happening. Just one side, you know, you're like, you know, I don't really see that. Climbing. Climbing's a good example. Anyone had any dunkers on their team? Right? Doesn't look exactly like rock climbing, but there's definitely some of that climbing motion that's going on there, holding and being able to let go. So I'm going to challenge you that could show up in both girls and boys basketball. For us, we're looking at dunkers at 14 now. So it's not even adult basketball. 14, 15 years old, we're looking at climbing as an action. What else was one that was like, a little? Sorry? Swimming. Anyone has athletes that are injured? Lower body injuries? Like an ACL, rolled ankle, anyone dealt with that? Recovery? In the pool. In the pool that goes there. So not in competition, not in practice, but in recovery. In recovery, we look at that one, yeah. Any others? Skating? Yeah, skating's another one. I was in an island country, and I was on the floor doing an on-floor clinic with a group of coaches, and I told them we're going through fundamental movement skills through a warm-up, and I said, okay, so you're running to the baseline, and I'd like you to do a skate stop. And they're all like, oh, what? Skating what? Never seen a pair of skates. We don't skate. But for us, we actually practice a skate stop on the basketball court because it keeps, as I'm running and I go this way, I can change my direction back real quick. So as I'm coming down to bounce the baseline, so I'm transitioning up the floor and I'm coming this way, as I bounce, I'm actually doing that same stopping motion as that I might do in a ski or a skate. So we skate, stop, and move, and we practice this movement because we want it to be a quick transition. Those that have skated have no problem doing this on the floor because they actually know the body movements. Those that haven't, like when I was in the island, I had to actually spend time on just like, what does that feel like? But in Canada, I can say, okay, you're going to do a skate stop and you're going to go this way. I don't even have to explain it because they know exactly what that is. Right? So it definitely does, but not on skates. Definitely doesn't show up on skates. Okay? But the same sort of movement. So I would challenge that a lot of these actually do show up and that we actually don't even realize how much they show up. So looking at some of these FMS skills, we've got loader motor skills, we've got object control skills, so controlling an object, but also balance movements. And as administrators and coaches, I would challenge you to get a list and think, how many times can I purposely put these into my training and practice? And see if my players can skip properly, and do they know those fundamental motions and components to a skip? Because when you need them to do a hesitation dribble, you sure hope that they have those fundamental movement skills around the skip. So I would really challenge you and challenge you with those that you're leading to purposely put these into your training and see if you can really make sure that you're going through these and that these athletes have these, so when they really need to do it against competition, they can. So what we have found is basic movements can be developed if athletes in Canada participate in 4 sports. And these are the 4 sports our government has come out to claim this. So one is athletics. So they're learning to run, jump, and throw. The second is gymnastics, so looking at those ABCs of athleticism, and then the dance and rhythmic abilities, swimming, and skating. And if a young child participates in these 4, it's setting them up to participate in any sport they want. So again, I'm not talking about they're going to be like an Olympic medalist, but they have the fundamental movement skills to be able to pick up any sport. Okay? And so with that basis, when we take a look at this, right, with water safety, I'm now looking at all the sailing sports, I'm looking at diving, I can start going into any of those sports if I want to pick it up. And so here we're creating a platform of opportunity for athletes. So again, how does this fit back to basketball? Well, when I'm running youth programs, I might be rotating concepts of these sports in. So that I can prep them. If they stay with basketball, great, they have some basketball components, but they could also pick up any other sport. And knowing, and we were talking about this morning, that 85% of our Canadian medalists at the Olympics have played up to 3 sports, 2 to 3 sports, up until the age of 15. I want them to make sure that they can pick up a secondary sport, even if they're going to be an elite basketball player. So as a basketball youth leader community leader, really being purposeful, and if your why is to make the best sporting experience for your youth, the best sporting experience, if that's your why, then how you do it is going to include these components. So, this is just a little bit of a diagram that our government used. So if you can't catch, jump, run, swim, or throw, you can't take part in the sports that are associated with that. So just with one of those, all of a sudden if I can't run, I can't do track and field. It's pretty hard for me to transfer into that, maybe at 11 or 12. But if I can, then it's an okay transfer. If I can't throw, then it's pretty tough to get into baseball, softball, bowling, soccer, goalball, football, or rugby. So just by teaching an athlete in basketball how to throw certainly helps with the baseball pass, but it also opens up their doors for sports to maybe transfer into now, or after the pathway of physical literacy to elite into active for life, they can pick up any of those transferring out of basketball. So what is your commitment, and how are you going to go about doing that? So, you know, in terms of bringing it back to basketball, we talk about fundamental movement skills, and then we talk about fundamental basketball skills, but they're so intertwined. So, for example, if I go down my FMS list, I have leaping, which totally impacts a fundamental basketball skill of doing layups. And not only is the layup and the fundamental movement skills important, but the idea of the decision. So like the length of the step, the timing of the actual layup itself, whether it's the coordination of the right foot, the left foot, you know, whether my layup is actually a straight line layup, or now am I rotating around a defender in order to finish, right? So it all comes back to the idea that they have to be able to leap. So when you go to design your youth basketball programs, putting in leaping games is extremely important to make sure that occurs. So what we did, and really realizing how important physical literacy is and how it really holds up elite as well as active for life, is we started to make parameters around how much you should be spending your time with different age groups, with fundamental movement skills and fundamental basketball skills. And it turns out that there's a significant amount of time spent at all age levels. So within our national team programs, and I'm talking through the entire horizontal range of each development stage, and with our national teams, it is a fundamental part that our athletes are working on fundamental movement skills. Starting and stopping is something that we spend an unbelievable amount of time. And pivoting, like you would think it's like a little kid's skill. Under 16, under 17, we absolutely sit there, because the thing is that fundamental movement skill changes, your ability to the skill changes over time. So the way you can stop and start the way you're like 7 changes significantly to the speed at which and the balance at which you can apply your stop and start at the age of 16 and 17. So we actually practice fundamental movement skills all the way down. And within our coaching education system, in what we call our learn to train level, which is the first level to which you do evaluation, so the coach would get evaluated, they have to show the ability to teach fundamental movement skills in every single practice. Shows up in every single practice. And they have to demonstrate the ability to do that. So we started to prescribe fundamental movement skills into our sport throughout the country. Specialization. So again, where I want to start with this, and I know I've worked with a couple people, groups in this, so I apologize it's coming twice, but maybe you could be leaders around your table in order to make sure it gets translated properly. But when we talk about philosophy, and this is where specialization comes from, like if your philosophy is set, it's going to determine how and when you specialize. So this is why I'm starting there, so just a bit of a pathway. When I look at philosophy, and we work with our coaches on this, we talk about, you know, philosophy clearly being a continuum, but am I a developing coach in my philosophy, or am I a winning coach? And sometimes you'll have conversations with coaches and you're like, yeah, my philosophy is to win. What we're doing is to win. I think winning is going to make this, this, and this. It's going to do this for my club. It's going to do this for my school. It's going to do this for my program. And then there's others that say we're developing coaches. And so in leading this, as a federation, we started to define our coaching and program philosophies on each of the ages and stages. And so for us, our under 16, under 17, under 18, under 19 have been deemed development stages. Okay? Now, it's really easy to walk around and tell like parents and kids and recruit people in to say, yeah, we're a development program. But what's really important about a philosophy is that you actually be it. That you act it and you be it. And so what I want you to do is just think a little bit to yourself and grab the person next to you and talk about where you fall or your program falls on this continuum. So some of you have had a bit of either 24 hours or you've had 5 hours to start reflecting on this, but just take 2 minutes to really reflect that where this comes up within you as a coach. So it might be on substitutions, it might be on cuts, it might be on playing time, it might be on rules, it might be on selection itself, or even like how you treat or give feedback. It could come up in several areas, but where does this come into you in your experience in the past in coaching or your current experience? So like 2 minutes between you and grab someone at your table or another table. Okay, great. So, this is something that's really important to think about. And what we challenge ourselves are to develop through winning and to really train and develop through the competition itself. So, this might look like athletes before the age of 15 trying multiple and being in multiple different positions. And it also impacts structure. And why we want to do this is this is what's been found in basketball with early specialization. When we early specialize, we have early burnout, we have overuse injuries from players playing in specific positions for too long. We have early retirement. So again, if I go back to my commitment for the experience of the athlete, and this is what we found with early specialization, it really changes the way we would look to operate once we start figuring out these impacts. So, again, what we did is we started to make some big, bold statements, some statements about some of these spaces and how much time you should be spending in each of these areas. So we have a pyramid that's built with fundamentals, fundamental movement skills, fundamental basketball skills, built onto technical, which is like skill development, strategy, which is like kind of 2-person, 3-person techniques, so like give and go, might be off-ball screening action, on-ball screening action, where it's kind of like 2-man, 3-man game situations, and then tactics. And tactics are like the short-term adjustments. Strategy is actually my system, so it's what I'm trying to do in the long term, so like the full court, man-to-man, or whatever I'm trying to play. And then my tactics are my short-term adjustments that will get me to my long-term where I'm going. So that may be like double on the first inbound. It might be in a 2-3 zone where you actually do a moving zone to the first quarter you trail, so it looks like man-to-man, but you actually rotate into the zone. So those are tactics that you would put in now with that. And what we did is at each stage we have recommendations. So if you take a look at fundamentals, learn to train, train to train, on the right side of that pyramid, you can see in fundamentals there should be no time on strategy. It should be all fundamental movement skills. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone has to stand on line and do it. We have games approach and all these ways of doing it. But when you take a look at the time to go into under 9 practice and see them putting in their new zone offense for 20 minutes of the 1 hour that they have does not fit with this alignment. And this is where you can start to structure what that looks like, right? So in that 90 minutes, how much time is being spent on everything there? And really reflecting on how we're creating these practices. So again, we've got statements for all those levels of the pyramid. So on the fundamental movement skills, on the technical, on the strategy, and what games should look like at each one of those stages. So how do you compete? So at fundamentals, it's a lot of fun. And it's definitely, we're looking at if you're competing kind of on 2-on-2, 1-on-1, and we kind of build all the way through, even looking at the percentages between practice and competition. So how much time you should be practicing. So I learned to train 70% to a 30% ratio. So taking your schedule as a club and looking to see, do they fall within those parameters? So are we spending more time on the development in the practice space at what age compared to our competition schedule? So just kind of motoring along here into developmental age. And this is what developmental age looks like in an age group, right? Where they're all the same biological age, but clearly there's a difference, right? Clearly there's a developmental age difference going on here. So this is what it looks like in both women's and men's basketball. And I'm sure you've seen this if you've been working with these age groups. And so when we talk about developmental age, we're talking the social, physical, emotional, actual development of the body. And it doesn't line up, and it's certainly not identical all the way through, and it doesn't match the biological age. So you're not like at 10 years old, this is what's happening within your body. It changes by person. And so you can see at 12 years, someone could look very, very different and have different maturity and puberty stages going on. And that is the athletes to which you're dealing with, and you actually need to treat them a little bit differently. And we've got a ton more ages, and I'm not going to go into them, but we use them for different measurements and standards and settings. But knowing that biological age and chronological age is not the only one. So being born in a certain year is not the only age. As coaches and administrators that we deal with, we actually have to take a look at a whole bunch of other ones and consider the other ones. And especially too, we often as coaches talk about this, our basketball age or IQ, right? So whether their knowledge of the game is actually higher than the standard of their biological age. And we've all had those kind of players. So there's tons of ages that actually impact planning. And again, you can see what this looks like in competition when they stay in their biological or chronological ages and stages of leagues. And so here, like, they rely often on aggression and strength, and that's what we saw with that little boy in the rugby game. He relied on his strength and the fact that he was able to get it through, not on his skill set. Right? There wasn't like, he didn't spin, there wasn't any skills going on there. You didn't have to dodge anyone, he actually just removed them out of his way. And so, you know, he's missing the skill sets, and this is what kind of happens in this space. And there's often a tendency to apply adult models for sport for children when we start to see this. So that really leads into that sensitive period. And when we talk about sensitive period, and this is a really big topic, but it's one that's important. So if you have time, go check it out, and I'll show you where. We start tracking peak height velocity. So who here has heard of or does measure athletes' height, like over time? Who's done it? Who's heard of it? Okay, kind of the thing to do. Again, it's the what that we're doing, but why is because of peak height velocity. You want to try and find when they're growing the fastest. And the reason for this is that they've got windows of trainability. This is the crazy, crazy, crazy part. The part that is super influential and has been really impactful to our training. There are three, in both males and females, that are based on biological and chronological age. And that's speed, suppleness, and the second window is speed. And those are, as of right now, research dictates that they're linked to biological age. Hitting training of those areas in those spaces is when the athlete is the most open to be able to make change in those areas. So if you miss that window, it's not that you can't train them in that space, but their body is certainly not the most open to do that training. So if, again, I'm committed to the actual experience of the athlete, then my program is going to reflect this, because I want their experience to be one that they can maximize themselves. The three others are based on relative to the peak height velocity, which actually changes in every single athlete. So actually measuring your athlete is great because you have a stat and you can put it on your sheet or your scorecard or whatever, but what you really need to do is find out when their peak height velocity is, so your training can reflect what's actually going on with that athlete. The final area I want to look at is competition, and what competition could look like. So there's two kind of things to take a look at. So we've got meaningful competition, and where I've defined it for our country to define whether a competition is meaningful or not, is if the halftime spread is 25 points and more, and then the end score is 25 points or more, then that is not a meaningful competition. However, if it's a 25 point spread at half, but yet 10 or under 25 at the end of the game, there could have been a meaningful competition going on there. And that's the uniqueness of basketball. And then the purpose of the competition. So it's like who I'm matched up against, what type of competition I'm doing, how many I'm doing, how much I'm playing. And that's going to make the competition meaningful or not meaningful. And again, the rules to put around this, so whether it's like a zone rule, a scoring rule, a playing time rule, or anything around that, you want to go and figure out, are you an athlete-centered program, or are you an admin-centered program, or is it centered around something else? Tradition? I don't know. But it's really important to figure it out, the why, and then to figure out what's going on with competition. So when we take a look at a competition model, this is something I'm playing with right now, with the secondary sport coming in, or secondary, not even sport, but division in basketball with 3x3 building, and officially an Olympic sport. So it's like for the first time ever, we have a possibility of winning 2 medals at Olympics. Up until now, we only ever had a possibility of 1. And it's kind of like the development of beach volleyball with indoor volleyball, and kind of looking on how that's grown and what that looks like. But for me, what's really important is what I look at as we lead our nation is to what does competition look like to be able to support both methods of competition. And so looking at active start and fundamentals, looking at 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3v3, which is again little kid rules of 3x3. So learning like quarter court play, spacing, attack and moving the ball, fill and recovery, all those concepts and skills that go in the quarter court. And then at Learn to Train, we're starting to look at 3v3, 4v4 if you're going on the 5-on-5 pathway, and now starting to look at the 3x3 games, the adult version of 3v3, and starting to head that way. And 4v4, we look to play it on a cross court with 4 players on the court, because we really don't need specialization at Learn to Train. And when you have 4 players, you don't really see coaches putting in like zones or that kind of application. All of a sudden you get concepts going on. So that's why competition, and it's really important to find the one that best suits you. And how we implement this is through our coaching education system, which is completely reflective of LTAD. So we actually have moved away from the traditional, like you have level 1, then you go to level 2, and then you go to level 3. But we've created a coaching education system that's reflective of who you are coaching. So if you were to enter at the orange bar, I'm coaching athletes between the ages of 5 and 9. And what I learn in coach education has everything to do with that age group. The yellow to green, which actually represents 60% of our coaches, we actually have 17,000 coaches in our country. So the education system is responsible for 17,000 coaches, and 60% of them are actually in the yellow to green. Now, they actually only have a 5-year lifespan because they're often volunteers and parents and coaches. So that program can't be more than 5 years. However, the crazy thing, remember those windows of trainability, they're all happening in that yellow to green in the highest transition stage. So the education and those that are impacting how and in basketball is happening in our highest turnover stage. So the education is very poignant on how to actually train that level of athletes, or that age and stage of athletes. And then we've got our Train to Compete, which is again more in the paid space. There's a couple other programs that I just wanted to note that I think are very important in our country. One is taking the LTAD and looking at other demographics that play basketball. So for us, we're in a reconciliation period with our Aboriginal culture for years and years of wrongdoing. And this is a targeted area to be able to offer sports and taking our programs, creating Aboriginal long-term athlete development programs for that community and bringing that and offering that into that community. For sure, working with wheelchair basketball to make sure that we're aligning in philosophy, sharing within coaching education and resources. In our last coaching education super clinic, we had all of the national team coaches from wheelchair basketball, again, who have placed higher than us on the international stage, either presenting or staying with us for the full weekend. Responsible coaching movement is something that we're looking again to protect athletes. So we're talking about background checks. A rule of 2 is never to be alone with an athlete under the age of 19. So whatever message you're delivering, you're always having someone else there, and we have like an ethical decision-making model that fits there. And the other part that we're really proud of is our women in coaching. And so with our national teams as being a model in this piece, is all of our head coaches for our national teams on our women's side are female. Our senior women's team that just completed the Olympics had 3 female coaches and 1 male, so the head coach being female, 2 female assistant coaches and a male. Our under 19 team, women's team that placed 3rd in the world, they had a full female staff. And our under 17 team had 2 head coach female and another female. Actually, I think they were all females this year. They were all females this year. Our trainer was male. So Our commitment to growing the women's side of basketball and sticking to that, and the rules that we put into our national championships. On the women's side, if you have a team entering into national championships, the head coach, if it's female, you can have 2 male assistant coaches. If the head coach is male, you must have 2 female assistant coaches. So our commitment to growth in women in coaching and sport is 100% there, and that's something we're really proud of too. So where has this led us? What's happened here? So in 2003, I mentioned we started to do this. We started to impact LTAD. We definitely had a period of change where not much was going on. But you can see the amount of players that have been drafted. So just on the men's side into the NBA. In the last 7 years, we've had 15 drafted. We had, just this past year, we had Dylan Brooks, who got drafted into the NBA. We had 3 more that picked up contracts through the Summer League in Vegas this year. We are now listed as, after the USA, the country that has the most players in the NBA in the world. And a lot of this is happening with the implementation of the LTAD. So the commitment to why and changing why has absolutely affected high performance. Here are some other areas to find more info. I know this was an hour, this is quick. I know I spent a lot of time. We spent hours in coach education on this, but I hope it's given you a taste and an interest. So the NCCP programs is something to Google and take a look. We've got coaching education and LTADs fitting in there. Fundamental movement skills training, we've got lots of videos sitting there. Game Plan is actually an online coaching education basketball platform, which traditionally has only been offered to Canadian coaches, but starting November, we're actually going to offer it to the world, and that's our commitment to global development. And just fixing some safety pieces, but we've got over 450, or I think now we're 480 videos that have been recorded with experts around LTAD, technical, etc. And then, of course, the LTAD and several resources at CSRL and Canada Basketball, our coaching education website has different pieces. And as I travel around, I like to tweet different things I learn around the world, fully committed to lifelong learning in that. So our Canada Basketball Coaching Education Twitter handle is there as well. This is the last video I just want to share with you. So I'm just going to play this real quick. I'm not going to play it all the way through, but I think this is a good way to end this off here.
In the social media world we live in, many things can go viral. And on April 30th, a 15-year-old Canadian girl by the name of Letitia Amahir did just that.
When I passed half court, I took a very long stride. After I felt the rim shake and the crowd go wild, I was like, oh man, like this is legit.
My assistant coach from Ryerson was coaching the game and coaches Team Ontario. So she was there and texted me after the game and said, Letitia just dunked. And when you get that message, like I've seen women dunk before, and sometimes you're like, yeah, okay, like I need to see the video. Then I got the video later that night and how she like got off of one foot and threw it down. And I knew from that moment that it was going to be enormous.
For Canada, I'm the first female to do it. I'm not scared to fail. It boosts my confidence to, try stuff that not a lot of people like to try.
Her talent wasn't a secret to us before that, but it's certainly not a secret anymore.
Adding her name to a short list.
So Letitia is an athlete to which we were able to capitalize on some of those training windows. So being able to work on her strength, being able to work on her speed. We've been working with her, she's only 15, but we've been working with and identified her when she was 12. She just got at the World Championships at the under 17. She was the only Canadian that was made the MVP list as a 15-year-old in the under 17, in the under 19 World Championships. So my question to you, and we're starting to look at our women and developing our women so that they're playing with the athleticism that happens in the men's game. We work with their men to try to expand their athleticism in their game. And my question to you is, you saw how long it took us to implement LTAD and to be able to see some of these things. My question to you is, where do you want to see basketball in Sweden in the next 10 years? Where is it going to go? And what are the videos that you want to play 10 years from now, from today, and where you want to go with that? So for us, we're really proud of our athletes. We're really proud of the leaps that they've made. We're proud of the changes we've had to take with that. And we're really proud with where we can go from here. So tack för den här dansen.